Cool. Hi everyone. Welcome to our session today. We are talking about unleashing the power of code-driven virtual desktop deployments for AVD and Windows 365. That was a ChatGPT automated session. I think that's quite cool. It's done quite well. But a little bit about us. It doesn't work.
Go old school.
There we go. Jake, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. Nice to meet you. I know met a few of you before. Jake Walsh, solutions architect. Work for CDW. Been floating around the community for a while. Sort of current focus for me is a lot of cloud infrastructure as code. So I'm going to certainly bore everybody with a lot of Terraform and Packer in this session. So I'll apologise for that. But yeah, find me afterwards if you have questions.
And you're a Microsoft MVP? Did you say that?
Yeah, I've got a few badges. Yeah.
I've got to say. So yeah, my name's Jarvis. I'm a principal architect, newly at Cidian. Been there for 2 months now. So I do more around like the EUC, modern workspace type thing. So anything Microsoft 365, Intune, AVD, Windows 365 related. Just kind of do a little bit of everything. So yeah, Microsoft MVP as well. So hey.
A quick cheeky shout out. So John and I host a monthly meetup called Cloud Chat Monthly. It's this Friday at 12 if you're interested. We have Maxim Tarnikov from Microsoft talking about GPTX models. So feel free to join. Feel free to sign up if you just want the recording as well. So
that was a cheeky plug. That was
very cheeky.
Did you get that signed off?
I did. Sorry. A few key points we're going to cover. So a very brief AVD versus Windows 365 overview. We're going to go into a little bit about why you would actually use code-driven deployment. So what's the method in the madness. Then we'll go on to tooling. So how do you actually get started? What do you need to do it? And then a little bit on methodologies. This is kind of an area when I started looking at infrastructure as code, I honestly felt like it was just like, where the hell do I begin? So hopefully this puts some clarity on that and gives some starting points. Some tips throughout, lab environment as well to show off. Again, we'll go through some code and bits and bobs like that, and then time for any questions if anyone has
Hopefully
any.
Some really difficult questions for you, Jake. Anyway, first of all, I looked at the agenda. There's no AVD versus Windows 365 stuff, so I'll spend a little bit of time talking about Windows 365, AVD, when to use Windows 365, when to use AVD, and some use cases as well. I think I'm in a decent position for that. So, Windows 365, what is it? I don't know if you guys had the same kind of thing as me. I think it was about 2 years ago. Windows 365 was announced, and it was like, wait a second, there's Windows Virtual Desktop. It was Windows Virtual Desktop at that time. And then it was like, the name change happened. It was like, what's going on? There's 2 different platforms doing exactly the same thing. I was confused. The rest of the world was confused except for Microsoft. So what Microsoft are trying to do now is bring that Windows into the cloud and have that desktop directly into the cloud. That's the branding behind it. And it's a highly performing managed desktop, depending on what one you get. The lower end ones, I wouldn't say really high performing, but as soon as you start going up, they aren't too bad, especially with some of the things like RDP short path and the short path stuff, all of that stuff, make it really quick to go onto. Cost effective if you are using it 24/7, not really cost effective if you're wanting to shut down laptops, turn them back on again. But I'd argue it's cost effective, especially if you're using them regularly and all the time. Secure, you've got all the conditional access policies for Intune, using Intune to manage that virtual PC consistently. So you have all the nice features such as setting catalogs, all the security features within Intune, which you can go straight to Windows 365. Yes, I know you can do that in AVD as well, but it's more integrated to Intune. So some of the reasons why I really like it, we've got 2 different deployment choices with Windows 365. We've got business, which I've seen nobody use. But there might be some out there. So that's up to 300 users, and all you need to do to deploy those desktops is literally give a license to a user. There's no configuration needed outside of that. Give the license to the user, it goes and deploys it within about 15 minutes or so, and yeah, there's no integration with Intune with the business deployment. There's no conditional access type, no direct conditional access. It's really just a laptop, a desktop in the cloud. Enterprise, all the stuff I said before about integration is all there. You need to do a lot bit more around provisioning policies and all of that good stuff, and we'll go into that in a little bit with the code stuff anyway. As I said, mentioned earlier, it is a fixed price model, so like your Microsoft 365, E3, E5, whatever you have licensing, it's more fixed costs along that. And so you pay 30, 35, 40 pound a month, and you have your cloud PC ready to use. So easy to predict future consumption. You don't have the going up and down price model of AVD. So use cases. I'd say it's really good for like small to medium-sized businesses. Again, when it gets to enterprises, it's although it's very easy to manage, I think you get a lot more kind of bang for your buck as such when it comes to for AVD. Again, fixed rate cost model, MEM integration, really cool. Where I've seen personally use cases has been for like contractors. I've had a company that have had 100 contractors at a time come into their company, and Windows 365 for the bring your own device has been really, really helpful. And also I've had training companies before where they just needed to just give a cloud PC to a user for a week or two, and then that just keeps on repeating when you can deprovision and reprovision cloud PCs for users. And that was it for Windows 365. So I'm guessing everyone knows what AVD is, but we'll go through this really quick. So AVD, again, virtual desktop solution delivered using Microsoft Azure. So you're a bit more of the AVD expert than me. I know a fair bit, but Jake has been doing these deployments a lot. Would you like to go through?
Yeah. We won't go into this too much, but essentially, built-in security using the wider Azure platform, rapid deployment and scaling. Hopefully some of that, what I've just said about that, will make sense when we show you some of the code as well. Some existing licensing integration options as well. We could probably fill an hour with some of the licensing stuff, so we won't go into that, but there's definitely options to do that. One of the big selling points as well, scalability, flexibility, all the sort of scale up, scale down, scale out, lots of options there. Typical use cases, so just a caveat, this is not the only thing, but this is typically what I see in my role. More enterprise organizations, so where they do want automation, they do want the scaling.
See, I told you it's too close together.
Otherwise we'll be like holding hands. Wider Azure ecosystem integration, so if you've got existing applications, existing business systems, that sort of stuff in Azure, it's very, very easy to bolt that on and just consume. Integration and usage with other Azure cost options, reservations, savings plans, that sort of stuff. I see a lot in my role, BCP, disaster recovery. We would like to have a desktop solution in the cloud that we scale out when we need to. Great, we can do that very easy. High-end graphics as well, so if anybody's got some Azure credit they would like to burn through, N-Series VM, your favourite game, have fun. There's loads of things you can do. Mixed approach as well, apps, desktops, whatever it might be. There's pretty much something there that can cater for your use case.
Actually, go back to Windows 365 real sec. It's not on here because it's just come out of private preview, so I'm allowed to talk about it now. So you've got Windows 365 Frontline that's come out. So if you go into anywhere like hospitals, retail places, all that type of stuff, Windows 365 Frontline is, in my opinion, really good. I've been using it in public preview now for the last 2 months. I've done a video on it, plug out to my YouTube. And yeah, it's really cool. So you basically get to, within one Windows 365 Frontline, I keep getting that mixed up, Frontline license, you get basically the use of 3 different cloud PCs within one license. I think the licensing cost would be around times 1.5, so about a license and a half cost, but you get 3 cloud PCs, but it's going to be in shift pattern. So if one user can use one cloud PC, then the other 2 users can't use the other 2, if you get what I mean. So when one person logs off, the other person can log into their cloud PC. And I think with Windows 365 Frontline, I keep getting that mixed up, if you was to then mix that with something called Windows 365 Boot, which is coming out, which is basically boot to cloud on straight into a Windows 365. Imagine having like a hospital ward with 5 different PCs, nurses being able to log into different different PCs and having their same PC in the cloud show up. I think is a brilliant use case. And something that hopefully we'll see a lot more of. Again, just thought I'd raise it up very quickly. So, Jake, why use code-driven deployment?
So yeah, good question. Why? So
Very good at reading.
I guess this is a good list of a way to say I'm quite lazy, and I like things where I don't have to do, the same job over and over again. So infrastructure as code is very, very good for that methodology. Lazy is probably not how I'd sell it to a customer, but there's a number of benefits.
Well, the customer doesn't have to know, do they?
Yeah. So obviously it's a method of managing and provisioning infrastructure via code. So in the same way that we used to click in portals, there are now options to actually have this written down as code. It's not anything particularly new, but it's kind of, I would say it's come of age in recent years. Lots of options to make things repeatable, so to do the same job over and over. Template files, for example, very scalable. We can have quantities, things like that. You change a 1 to a 10, you change a 10 to 100 in the code. Great, we scale out. Easy to share as well. Write once, share it with the team, have it distributed amongst colleagues, put it out in the community, all of that sort of stuff. Usually imperative or declarative code. So imperative is do this, declarative make this. So Terraform that we're going to look at in a little bit later is declarative. We're describing an infrastructure. Often integrated into version control systems as well. So if it all goes wrong, you know who to blame, which is really, really handy, or you can work that change backwards. It's probably the better way, the latter, of selling that. Can also be edited and managed in most common tools and platforms. So if you're using GitHub, you might be saving things there. You might be putting it in an Azure DevOps repo. You're probably using Visual Studio Code as well. Not always, but usually it's also adopted as part of a wider strategy as well. So occasionally you do find it in isolation, but usually it's part of a bigger strategy that's sort of being brought into a business or team.
So I like to give Jake questions whilst he's talking, so you get used to it. So before you got into like Terraform and stuff like that, and infrastructure as a code, like how much coding background did you have? So was it quite easy to pick up the infrastructure as code from the get-go?
I would say so, and when we look at the code, it's, for me, so taking Terraform as an example, Bicep is very similar in its way. It's human readable. You don't need to, you don't have to spend hours and hours learning lots of intricate detail to see it. You can read it, you can see what it's doing, and it kind of makes sense,
okay.
Which is a strange thing for me to say without showing, but I will show you in a second. Another thing I think is really important as well, so infrastructure as code, that the benefits are sort of cyclical in nature. So when things are repeatable, the speed of deployment increases, the risk becomes less. You do something time and time again using the same template, therefore it's more consistent, therefore it's more reliable in ClickOps. If I go and click around in the Azure portal for an hour, chances are I will make a mistake. It's inevitable. Write once, deploy many times. If you're a team, you have the opportunity to write it once and share that. Again, easily duplicatable at that point, and then we're back to that point. It's more repeatable. So these things tend to continue and snowball, really.
And how would you say the benefits of, say if someone's gone and created a landing zone or Azure AVD infrastructure, and they've done it using ClickOps before, is there like additional benefits then to start to rewrite that in Terraform and start managing it from there?
Probably another big one is the DR aspect. If something goes wrong, or we need this is our production environment, how do we know that the change we're planning to make is going to work? Well, great, take the template, redeploy it somewhere else, run the test, get the result. We know what the result is going to be at that point. So, yeah, that's probably a good example. So just a quick bit on tooling. So kind of four key things for the items we're going to show off. Terraform to create the infrastructure, Packer to create machine images, the Azure CLI, so some pre-Terraform scripting you would require, and some tweaks and things, and then obviously PowerShell for some of the software installations and Windows 365 deployment. Just a quick note on that as well, don't make life hard for yourself, just use Chocolatey to install, run a quick script, it will do all the hard work for you. I really like Chocolatey, I think it's pretty fantastic, to be honest. You could use Wing-Get as well.
If I had £1 for every time you said use Chocolatey, I'd probably have £10.
But yeah, once you've got that installed, you can do this. You can also do a Choco upgrade all, so it will keep those up to date for you as well. So very, very handy.
Question.
How comfortable do you feel using public package repositories, or would you recommend that organisations have private ones? Because that's quite a large maintenance overhead.
So,
repeat the question if you're recording.
So the question was, how comfortable would I be using public package repositories? So I think if you were an organisation who was, let's say, going to adopt Terraform and adopt a particular version of VS Code or something like that, you probably would want them inside of whatever app management system you had in place, because you could then end up in the situation where I'm running one version, somebody else is running another, obviously with that becomes challenges that, well, it works on my machine, but it doesn't work on his machine, as an example. Some of the ways you could get around that might be something like GitHub code spaces. So nobody's actually working locally. You would work in a browser-based solution or something similar, but certainly for getting started or kind of community-based things like most of the stuff I'm doing, I would say this is a good place to start.
Personally, if I was going for like an enterprise deployment or for any type of business, I would use something like Patch My PC and use Intune to deploy rather than Chocolatey.
Yeah. I haven't personally, but yeah.
What I do is, if you want that, basically I have like a sort of end based sort of where you do the chocolate pull down into there, and then you automate the hash checking and whatnot, and all this sort of checks and like, then you release it to your internal repository.
Yeah.
So internal repository becomes very, but let's say when you say public repositories, it's difficult to put the malware in that chocolate, believe me, because I mean, even if you do it right. I put my own packages in there and I haven't met their standards.
Could you say difficult there, but not impossible?
We've seen things with like SolarWinds and 3CX as like perfect examples of malware getting done. It's mainly increasingly suspicious of any kind of public package repository. Sorry to say it's
No, I think it's an important point though, because if you are considering adopting this as an organisation, the tooling is the critical factor. We need to be. Another option would be to look at something like Terraform Cloud, and integrate that with a version control system.
Again, I'm quite simple. Patch my PC and put it into Intune. It's really easy to deploy then, especially in that scenario.
Why is your CLI and Azure PowerShell?
So the CLI is purely just as me staying familiar with what I know. You could use either. The bulk of the work that I'll show is done in Terraform and Packer. It's really just the extra bits and bobs sort of wrapping up.
So Windows 365 for this example can only be deployed using the Graph APIs and stuff. So that's the reason why it's on there as well.
So just a quick overview of Terraform. So most people will obviously be familiar with Terraform or have heard of it. An infrastructure as code software tool. You can interact with a wide range and variety of platforms, your on-premises systems, your AWS, Azure, whatever it may be, using something known as a provider, which effectively is like a plugin for it that tells it how to interact with that provider. Three main varieties, so open source, free, you can use on your device, you can use in your organization. There's also a cloud offering and an enterprise offering as well. In the examples I'm going to show, I'm just using it to build infrastructure for a lab environment. So it's not a sort of full enterprise deployment, it's just building some infrastructure blocks to support what we would need to have for AVD. Quick overview of Packer as well. So Packer is a tool for automating the creation of machine images. So for example, people might have used a number of different systems and solutions before to build machine images. Packer is a way that allows you to do that using an infrastructure as code template. If anyone's used the Azure Image Builder service as well, I believe that's built on Packer. It works in a very similar way.
I'm going to ask you the same question I ask you every single time.
It is built on Packer.
Same question I ask every time we do this is why don't you just use the stuff in the gallery? Why build your own custom image?
Again, I just prefer to have some apps on the images for testing. If I'm perhaps building a demo environment for a customer, I can perform customizations, I can embed scripts, that sort of stuff. Again, it's also for me, coming back to sort of what I said at the beginning about perhaps being a little bit lazy, I can have a template that I know works, build something out, I can rinse and repeat and just keep using that every time. So a little bit on methodologies, kind of what we're doing, what we're on about here. So for AVD, I've pre-deployed a demo, and I'm just going to kind of walk you through the code and show you some examples and show you how to do that in Azure DevOps. And then John's got some bits for Windows 365. But essentially, this just gives you an idea of the flow that we would go through to achieve what we need for these environments. So yeah, I'm just going to go through some of these demo elements whilst John sorts his laptop out. But essentially, I'll use Terraform to do resource groups, virtual networks, subnets, NSGs, perhaps some storage for profiles, a compute gallery to store our images, that sort of stuff. And Packer would be used to build a machine image, put any applications on it, perhaps make customizations that we'd need as an example. CLI, PowerShell, perhaps even the portal as well would potentially be used for tweaks. So perhaps you need some small changes that you can't do in Terraform or something like that. You just need to make a small adjustment. Broadly the same for Windows 365, but we don't need to deploy our own infrastructure. So Packer will do the image, and then again the tweaks and things and publishing would be done either via CLI, portal or PowerShell. I'm just going to attempt to seamlessly switch now, so stand by. Sorry, I was hoping this would duplicate, so I'm going to have to just turn around to show you some of the examples. Is that visible at the back, or does that need to be bigger? Question heard?
Zoom option. I can read it now.
Okay, is that okay?
Just.
Cool. I can go. Yeah, just get rid of that.
644.80, that's the one.
Yeah. So this, just to give you an idea, this is an example of a Packer template. This is very, very simple. This is just something I use in my lab to build me an environment out. Essentially, I'm just going to come this way because of the microphone. Essentially, what I'm doing here is I'm starting with a builder. So I'm building using the Azure ARM builder. You'll notice I've hashed out the client ID, secret and subscription ID, but obviously you need to have that information in before you run Packer. I then need to give it some information. So I need to tell it where the image that it's going to create is going to go, and also what I'd like that image to be called. Obviously, it's not going to get very far without that information. I need to tell it what the OS type is going to be, the publisher, the offer, and the SKU. So if you've done any sort of programmatic deployments of images in Azure, you'll be familiar with all of that. We then need some basic information about how we're going to communicate. So it's obviously using WinRM. Most of this is lifted just from the examples on the HashiCorp website, so you can go and see this. I'll also tweet out a link to a GitHub repo where some of these samples are available as well. We then need to start looking at what we're actually going to do with the image, and this is where it starts to get a little bit more interesting. So we've got a build resource group name, that's where the build will happen, and we've got a VM size to use for the build. So you can be quite generous with that as well, because it's only going to exist for a very short amount of time, so don't worry about it costing too much. We then have a section called provisioners, and provisioners is where it starts to get interesting. So provisioners are effectively blocks where we define what we want to happen to our images. So again, I'm using Chocolatey here just to put a couple of things on the image, so 7-zip and FS Logic's more just for demo purposes than anything else. We then got a restart, so after it's done some app installs.
I hate writing PowerShell in JSON files because you don't get any syntax checking, you don't get any linting. So
Yeah.
if I'm doing stuff like this, I'll call a PowerShell file.
As in download it from another location.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or you could even do it as a private endpoint on
Yeah, or
blob
storage or something. Yeah.
And that way, you don't have to write PowerShell in JSON.
Yeah, it's a very good point. Again, this is just me with a simplistic template, but there is a similar thing in Terraform with a custom script extension where you can get it to go off and call that, but yeah, certainly very handy. Again, very simple stuff here. Install some apps, perform a restart, sysprep my image. That's all it's doing. I will quickly just show you the end result of this. So actually to run that, once you'd obviously put your subscription ID, the client secret, all of that information in, you would simply type packer space build and then put the file name of the JSON file. It will go off and do it. You can go off, have a cup of tea, read the paper, whatever you want to do. Come back and you'll have a managed image in Azure built for you. I'll just show you what that will look like once it's been done. Sorry, it's like my brain cannot work with left to right, back to front. So. Yeah, I'm sorry that's a little bit small, but effectively at the end of that Packer process being run, you'll be left with an image that you can use. And you can obviously import that into a gallery, you can use that just to build a VM, you can do what you like with it. But obviously one of the nice advantages there is I've got a Packer template that will build an image. So if I wanted to run things like custom applications, as you said, integrate with your own storage account, something like that, you could do exactly that. You could rerun that process time and time again, get the same result and have an image built for you. I'm just going to switch now and show you some Terraform, so apologies one at the back. I will make this a bit bigger if I can. Is that readable at the back? Cool. attempt to go back to front here. So I'm just using, this is an example of an environment I wrote, which is just effectively a little base lab designed as a lab environment. You can spin it up, destroy it. I use this just for doing sort of basic demos with customers. And effectively this just builds out a set of standard resources in a single subscription. So it's just a very basic lab environment. I'm just using this to highlight how easy Terraform actually is to read. So you can see here I'm just building some resource groups. You can see resource, Azure RM resource groups, one for identity. It's got the name, the location based on a variable. We've got some tags, one based on an environment tag variable. It's nice and easy to read. It's not challenging or anything like that. It's just very straightforward. If we move on, and we'll have a look at a key vault. So you can see here, just building out a key vault. One of the really nice things about Terraform is all of these are available as fully working examples from the registry. So the registry is effectively HashiCorp's area where you can go get an idea of how you should write a code, how you should deploy a particular resource or something like that. And it just gives you a starting point. So all of these have just been built from that as the starting point. So you can see key vault, an access policy, some permissions, secret permissions, again, tags. You know, here I'm generating a randomized password and then putting that inside the key vault. I'm also putting an expiry date on it, so I think 8,760 hours is a year, or as near to it as I could get. Building out some virtual networks, so doing some nice stuff here. So you'll notice in the address space, I actually have in my variables file a single CIDR address range defined, nothing beyond that, and Terraform is actually doing that subnet calculation for me, so I'm just telling it, here's the range for the whole region, go ahead and do that calculation, I don't need to worry about it. So if I want to change that range, I change one variable, everything cascades down. So there's lots of functions like that in Terraform that can really make your life easier. I believe, and keep me honest here, I think that's just come to Bicep as well. The subnetting function, something similar. I'm sure I saw something about that. But yeah, essentially you can sort of see me building out the environment here. You know, we move on from VNets onto subnets, quite a few subnets there. We look at VNet peerings, that sort of stuff. It's very straightforward. You know, here I'm grabbing the client IP, so I'm going to use that in an NSG. So it puts a nice little NSG in, so nobody can try and break into my lab environment if they're criminally short of things to do with their time.
How did you put this file together in the first place? Did you actually manually edit it in here?
So I wrote this in VS Code using the registry as a reference point. This is kind of like a V2 version of an earlier lab environment I wrote, but essentially edited in VS Code using the extension, you know, just to do that. Copilot works really well with Terraform as well for working like that, but the actual registry is really, really good for taking those examples and allowing you to build that environment. So I won't go through all of the items. I'm just going to show you a couple more bits. So I'm actually using a plugin called InfraCost as well, which actually will show me the cost of some of the items. So you can see here, £2.87 a month for that IP. If I click on it, it'll show me that resource as well. So even prior to running this deployment, I can get an idea of what this will actually cost. You know, can I afford to deploy this lab environment, for example? Just useful to see that. I know £2.87 is not going to break the bank, but it certainly gets more pricey with certain resources. And essentially, you know, all of the sort of Terraform code, you can see things like tags, you can see all of the different interfaces I'm building, IP configs, you know, there's lots of different things you can start to build out. But if you're trying to find things, it is quite easy to look at that code and find what you need. I'm just going to show something that has a slightly higher cost to give you an idea. So there you go, yeah. So for example, I'm building a virtual machine at that point, which is costing me about 118 pounds a month. Just very quickly, sorry, I'm back to front on here. So if you do wish to get some of those templates, JWalsh 90 on GitHub, there's a whole load I've written you can play around with. If they don't work, please shout at me and I'll fix them. But hopefully, you know, that's just a starting point. If you are kind of new to this, you can have a look at them.
Does it matter what order you put things in your file?
It doesn't know, and it could be across multiple files. So you could have 10 different files to keep things simple. You could take them in and out. Effectively, when you run the Terraform apply, it will look at those files, work out an execution plan, and then we'll deploy them in the right order. In most cases, the dependency kind of mapping is pretty accurate and works. So for example, it will know that if you say, build this VM and put it in that resource group, that it knows to build the resource group first. Occasionally, if you do odd things, you may need to put those dependencies in place. But in most cases, it's very, very good at dealing with that. Just one last bit before I hand over to John as well. So I'm just doing a very, very basic pipeline in Azure DevOps. I've got Terraform, validate and plan, a deploy phase, a destroy phase. I won't go into all of these because it's a bit short of time, but then I'm just using another one that runs Packer. So if you want a lab, you can just trigger, have built. It's a really, really good way to do it. Makes it very, very straightforward, very easy to do. You know, I've deployed this being sat on a train before. Click go on my phone, gone to a customer, done a demo, come home, hit destroy. Great, makes it nice and easy for me. So yeah, hopefully that just gives you a nice overview, and then over to you.
It's not working at all. Oh, see, who made a joke about the Mac not working earlier, by the way? Because it had the Apple sign on it. Yeah, that works straight away. So when it comes to like Windows 365, Terraform, there's nothing at the moment in terms of being able to put together some code and stuff like that. But what there is at the moment is something called Microsoft Graph X-Ray, and I think it's absolutely brilliant. So it's a tool that's just available if you just Google it. Merrill from, I can't remember his surname, Merrill something from Microsoft in the US. Created it, and it's a brilliant tool. Basically, what it will do is it will just scrape all of the actions, everything in the background within either intune.microsoft.com or some areas of the Azure portal. It will just basically scrape at what's happened, and on the right hand side here, give me a good list. So if I go over to intune.microsoft.com and go to devices, you can see right here everything that's starting to happen. We've got a connection error. Great. One second, where's my hotspot? Oh, the hotspot was working a second ago. It's because I closed the laptop. There we go. Patience. Cool, so I go to intune.microsoft.com, I go to devices, and then on the left-hand side, when it eventually loads up from my back pocket, Windows 365. As you can notice here on the right-hand side, I start getting a whole list of all the stuff that's happened in the background, and at the moment, it's a bit useless because I haven't really done too much. So I can clear that session, and if I want to start creating some provisioning policies and make them repeatable and into code, I literally can go to provisioning policy, create policy, give it a Windows 365 dev example, and we'll give it enterprise. I know enterprise works. We'll put it on the Microsoft hosted network, put it in the UK, and enable single sign-on. Press next. We'll use the image that Jake showed earlier. See, using Packer. So we deployed that months ago now. Do the language to United Kingdom. We'll put none on the additional services, and we will assign it to a group. We'll just assign it to the top group and press next. And when I go off and create this provisioning policy, hopefully there's no one in that group. On the right hand side now, I can actually see the provisioning policy in, ready to go for PowerShell. So all I need to do now is just copy and paste this out, put it straight into PowerShell, into Visual Code Studio, into a PowerShell, and then you can just keep repeating this now. You have to kind of take out some of the bits, change some of the bits that you need to, such as, can everyone see that?
Nope.
Nope, sorry. What do you think of that? Hard. It's useful. So imagine the code there. It is there. So yeah, you get the whole code down here. So we get the display name. I get what is Windows 365. I get the image type here. I get the display name here, and I get all the way down to like the single sign-on bits and what region and stuff that is around here as well. So we can literally just take that out, and we've actually put a code together, something on the it's not publish it, is it? Almost ready to go, where we can just literally deploy it out of Windows 365 environment just using a PowerShell script. Nice, quick and easy, not as technical as Jake's. Like Terraform will scare me, really bad. But it's nice and easy just to kind of pull out and do. And again, if you've got anything for like groups and you're wanting to automate stuff, anything from groups, users, all that type of stuff, you can use Microsoft Graph X-Ray to export that out basically. And for me, I think it's a really, really cool tool. Cool, nice and quick for that one. I didn't want to go on to. We are just about at 1:45 now. So, is it question time?
Yeah, it's fine.
Cool. So, any questions at all from everybody? Hi.
One really interesting dimension graph. So basically, once you have the code, after you provision that, you use PowerShell, authenticate, copy and paste, and you create your file.
Exactly. So for myself, like as a consultant, I used to be a consultant. I literally done for I think it was 2 Windows 365 deployments. Just used PowerShell from what I've already done in my own environment. It was really, really easy. I know it really is easy anyway, Windows 365, but it was even easier.
Thank you. That's a good solution. Thank you.
No worries. Any other questions? Hey.
Any tips if you're not allowed to store passwords in source file or code? For example, things like a domain join password, for example.
Yes. So let's say, for example, you took a...
Sorry, the question for the recording, the question was about storing admin passwords and secret information.
So in the case of deploying using Terraform, you can reference a pre-made key vault, or, for example, you could build that key vault as part of that process. So in the actual example I shared, I will share some links and things like that. In the example I showed, the key vault is built first. A random string is then generated and marked as sensitive. It's then stored in that key vault. When the VM is then built, that sensitive string is used as the admin password for it. So obviously the same would apply if, for example, you had a domain join password. You could reference an existing key vault. The nice thing about the example I've shared is 10 of us could deploy that environment and we'd all get a completely different password.
If you're using pipelines, you could store secrets in the pipelines.
Yeah.
As well.
It's interesting you mentioned that. In the example I use as well, it pulls, because it's, when I need a demo for a customer, I need a domain controller running in most cases. So I have a PowerShell script that promotes the VM to a DC right at the end. It actually pulls that password out of the key vault. Because it's the local admin password of the first domain controller, it becomes by proxy and promotion the domain admin password. It pulls that and does exactly that method in the pipeline and then replaces that in the PowerShell. So the whole process is automated end to end. Yeah.
Cool. No more. All right, thanks everyone for your time. Cheers.